All right, here we go. This is a week 6 recap on First and Pod. I'm Andrew Fillipponi. Listen and subscribe to First and Pod on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. I am by myself because Danny Parkins abandoned me long ago to go work for Fox Sports 1. And Patrick Peterson, who he brought in and has done a fabulous job so far this season, has a well-earned evening off because his wife has celebrating a birthday. I am not going to share the number. I don't even know what the number is, but he is doing that. So we gave him a vacation day. And so I'm going to do all of the lifting, which is fine because I'm now working with a personal trainer and doing a lot of lifting on my own anyways. I have no idea how long this is going to take me. We've got Spencer back producing, so he might get in the chat here and give me some stats, and hopefully we don't get too bogged down as we move along and work our way through these games. We always start with Sunday Night Football. I watched the whole thing. Bengals and Giants. Cincinnati wins 17-7. And I think what the Bengals are going to take away from this game and what NFL fans should latch onto from this game is that Cincinnati just held the Giants to 7 points on the road, which, that won't sound like a Herculean effort or something that is worth maybe making a big deal out of, because this is a team that 2 years ago was in the AFC Championship game and 3 years ago in the Super Bowl. But they did come in at 1-4, and their defense was the 31st defense in the league. They had, other than Carolina, who's an absolute joke, the Bengals had the worst defense in the NFL, and that's why, if you go by all the numbers, Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL this season, but they've only got the one victory to show for it. It's why they scored 38 points last week to Baltimore and lost in overtime. It's why they went to Kansas City and lost earlier this year. So that has been this team's bugaboo now, going back to last year, even when Burrow was out and Jake Browning came in and played decently. So this is a step forward. And if I'm a Bengals fan, and I'm the farthest thing from it being in Pittsburgh, I really think that this can be a momentum builder for them. And I think they're a playoff team at 2-4, which sounds nuts because of the way things started. And great stat by Spence right off the bat here. It's the first time Cincinnati's held the team under 10 points since 2019. They got their defensive line back for this game. B.J. Hill, who used to play for the Giants, was wreaking havoc inside. Trey Hendrickson got the better of the matchup against Andrew Thomas, the left tackle for the Giants, who's really come on here in the last year. He had 17.5 sacks last year, and I thought was phenomenal in this game. So that has been a big problem. Teams have run on them. They've passed on them. Their corners made plays on fourth down in this game. DJ Turner, Mike Hilton, Britt made plays. And so these are guys that have been really criticized and crushed for the way they've played. And they responded tonight. Now, the Giants, self-inflicted wounds again. Their kicker missed 2 kicks. Daniel Jones had a classic Daniel Jones brain fart in the red zone where he could have gotten the ball to Tracy, the running back. Instead, he just threw it up, lobbed it up to the middle of the field, which you're taught to never do, even though there was pressure, and took points off the board on that trip. I mean, the Giants moved the ball decently in this game. I would say between the 30s, but just weren't able to get anything out of it. The 2 leading rushers in this game were quarterbacks. Burrow had that 46, 47-yard scamper, whatever it was on the opening drive for a touchdown. Spencer brings up a good point. When the Bengals were trying to ice the game, Chase Brown fumbled, and the Giants couldn't jump on the ball. Nabin, the rookie from Minnesota, and it scored it out of bounds. So it is – these games have been synonymous with the Giants, other than the great season 2 years ago where they went all the way to the divisional round. The Daniel Jones-led Giants have found ways to let games like this get away from them. He is now 1-14 in primetime. We bust Kirk Cousins balls. This dude's record is like that of a Cleveland Browns team, from 7 or 8 years ago. 1-14 in prime time. Are you kidding me? Daniel Jones. And I thought he had played better the last 2 weeks. Remember, Neighbors didn't play in this game, 0-8. Neighbors, I thought it was weird. NBC shows him because he's out in concussion protocol. Dude's got his cell phone on the sideline before the game starts. I've never seen that before. I thought that was outlawed. And I know he was at a concert there a couple days ago and got shredded for it. I get that. The guy's in concussion protocol. It should not be at an event with bright lights and loud noises. As someone that suffered a concussion, so I'm not even throwing stones at glass houses here. I'm talking about it from personal experience. I don't think there's a doctor on planet Earth that would tell somebody that is still experiencing concussion symptoms that is a good place to go. So I'm a little bit frazzled by that as a guy that had great Giants memories as a kid because that's my mom's team and grew up in a household where Giants games were on every Sunday. So they're now 2-4, but it is a different 2-4 than the Bengals because I'm going to pull their schedule up here in a minute. And I told you I was not going to waste people's time here or try to be in one of these situations where I'm researching things while we're live on the air. But when you're by yourself, sometimes you have to do a little bit of that. So they go at the Browns next week. They host the Eagles after that, host the Raiders, and then at the Ravens. That's their next 4 games. You figure they go 3-1 in those 4 games. That would get them to 5-5 with 7 games to go. And with their quarterback in the way he's played all year, and if their defense can build off of this, and I thought Collinsworth made a good point about how getting T. Higgins healthy and on the field has made things easier for everybody in that offense. Offensive line was not good tonight either. Their tackle Mims, I thought, was brutal. Ojulari had a throwback game and looked amazing for the Giants, and Burns, who they brought over from Carolina, had a big night against Orlando Brown Jr. too. But when you score only 7 points, you're not going to win a lot of games, and that really is a bad look, even with Neighbors out for Brian Dable, who is an offensive coach. All right, let's get to the games from earlier in the day. I hope that was a sufficient breakdown of Sunday Night Football. Let's start with the game. This is the Beltway Bowl. The teams, I almost said schools, because that's usually how I think about this stuff when it's like regional rivalries, college football. Commanders and Ravens, these teams are only 30 miles apart. And this game, I think, slowly built up to a point where it did meet the hype here of having Jaden Daniels against Lamar Jackson. Remember, NBC actually wanted to move this game into prime time, which would have been much better off for everybody instead of watching a 17-7 slog to see these two teams combine for 53 points. And it would have been a chance for for all of America to watch Jaden Daniels. A big chunk of America got this game. Nance and Romo were there today for CBS, but it was a 1:00 Eastern game. So, obviously, people are splitting their time between their own team's games and the Red Zone channel when that's going on, when we're talking about a game in the early window. The question I have is, what's the biggest takeaway from this game? And for me, it is honestly, and I don't often say this about a team that didn't even, as an underdog, cover the spread. Okay, if you bet the Ravens today, you cashed that ticket. You won money if you thought that Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry were going to get it done at home today. So usually, if an underdog doesn't even cover the spread, as a guy that bets a lot, I'm not going to have complimentary things to say about them. But I came away from this game even more encouraged and impressed with Jaden Daniels. I am now, the last 2 years on this podcast, I, like the guys who were picking number one, I think I had the wrong player ranked number one. Obviously, Bryce Young's not as good as CJ Stroud. That was last year. And I liked Drake Maye more than I like Jaden Daniels. And we'll get to Maye, who made his debut today. It was not all bad for him. And I liked Drake Maye more than Caleb Williams, too. I would have taken him number one overall. So the moral of the story there is, do not hire me. Let me just bloviate on here and do this First and Pod podcast with you guys. And don't hire me to be a team's general manager, because with quarterbacks, apparently I'll run it. I like Kenny Pickett, too. So I'll run it into the ground. So take what I say here with a grain of salt when it comes to young players. But Daniels was not, I think, intimidated or overwhelmed by the situation whatsoever today. The Ravens right now have Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers clicking on all cylinders. They got Mark Andrews going today. He caught a touchdown pass. He had been awful, invisible for their first 5 games of the season. So if they can get him looking like the player he was pre-injury, that would be an even bigger boost to the Ravens offense. We know that they are the best team at running the football in the NFL. Their pass blocking is still not quite, the run blocking, I would say, is top tier. Pass blocking is still not there yet, but it's making inroads and it's making strides, and we saw that in this game. I thought Baltimore was going to take a step back, and when they were 0-2, I thought I was going to get the last laugh there and be able to rub salt in the wounds of a team that I also can't stand. And by the way, another good stat here from Spencer. The Commanders are the first team since 1970 to score 150 points in their first 5 games of the rookie quarterback. Spence, who the frig was the quarterback in 1970 who had his offense guns a-blazing back then? You got to see if you can find that name. I'm having my own brain fog from being out in Vegas earlier in the week. I still feel like I'm like in a 72-hour hangover. So I don't have the mental capacity to just spit names out like I usually do. So you're going to have to do some digging on that for me here to get me the numbers that I want. For Lamar Jackson, and I've been skeptical of Jackson as a passer, I still need to see him do it in big games. And I don't think that that's a ridiculous standard or threshold for these guys because he's a 2-time MVP. He's the only 2-time MVP to not even make it to a championship game. Okay. So, yeah, you're damn right. I'm going to ask the guy to be the best quarterback or close to it in the league. He's getting paid like that too now, by the way. This is only the second time in his career he's had back-to-back 300-yard games passing. And then you throw in Henry, who had 134, and that's now 4 in a row for Baltimore, who started 0-2, so they're tied with the Steelers in the AFC North. But I still think you can come out of this game feeling like Jaden Daniels is capable as a rookie of winning the NFC East, getting the Commanders to a home playoff game, winning a home playoff game, basically following the script that we saw C.J. Stroud use last year when he took the league by storm. And Danny and I on this podcast made bets on him to win the MVP. And Vegas has gotten wise on that. And the odds for Daniels to win this MVP are so ridiculously short that I am not going to bet it now because the price today is so much worse than it was even 2 to 3 weeks ago. Lions and Cowboys. Okay, I probably effed up and should have made this the first afternoon game that we talked about. This is what happens when flying by the seat of my pants and I'm all by myself here. The final score was 47-9. And I believe both fan bases are absolutely sick tonight. And this is a situation for the Detroit sports fan where in the span of 24 hours, I think your world has come crashing down. You were on an all-time heater as a Detroit sports fan here after the Lions got this sports region. I guess some are Michigan fans, so maybe you want to give them credit. But as far as the pro teams go in Detroit, the Lions finally ended the drought of all those teams sucking, frankly, by going to the NFC Championship game last year and almost going to the Super Bowl. And then the Tigers this year, what they did in the last 2 months of the baseball season. But think about where we were going into the weekend here. The Tigers were up 2-1 on the Guardians, and the Lions offense was looking unstoppable and getting ready to go down to Dallas. Detroit loses games 4 and 5. Scooble looks mortal for the first time since Memorial Day, gives up a grand slam. Tigers fairy tale season ends. And then this game happens. And this game should have been about, we should be talking about how the Lions gutted the Cowboys, embarrassed the Cowboys, uh, continued this trend of the Cowboys in front of their home fans. Jerry Jones, in the way he treats every game like it's a concert, like it's a festival, like it's an event. And now 4 straight games going back to the playoffs against Green Bay have been utter disasters for the Cowboys. That should be the primary focus. It can't be, because Aiden Hutchinson broke his tibia in this game and needed to have emergency surgery hours after the game was over. Detroit's defense has gotten way better this year. Detroit's defense last year was one of the worst in the NFL. I think it was the worst among teams that qualified for the playoffs, if you go by the numbers. And they have turned it into statistically an above average defense this year. Hutchinson came in leading the league in sacks this weekend. The guy has elevated his game to a point where there's my guy, TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, who is overrated. We know that. Max Crosby. And then you've got Aiden Hutchinson with the run he's on of dominance this season. And now this injury happens. Detroit with Aiden Hutchinson is good enough to win a Super Bowl this year. It took them a few weeks, but now the play calling was elite today. Ben Johnson, the trick play that they ran to Sam Laporta, Goff's last 3 games, you could put his last 3 games up against any 3-game stretch in his career. The offensive line is back to kicking ass and taking names. Montgomery, fresh off that extension, is looking like a bulldozing back where he's just running over everything in sight, laying waste to it. So this was supposed to be a celebratory kind of deal for the Lions. You hand Dallas its worst home loss since Jerry Jones bought the team, and they have allowed 167 points in their last 4 games. That is insane. But everything comes with the caveat of, is Aiden Hutchinson going to play another game this season? And if he doesn't, in the best division in football now, that is going to require Detroit to really rally the troops here, puts more stock on their offense to be, puts more pressure on their offense to be perfect, and might even require them to make a trade. Look, we don't know what's going to happen between now and November 3rd. I think that's the deadline date. They're going to have to find a Von Miller type like the Rams did when they made that trade with Denver to win their Super Bowl, in my opinion, if they cannot get him back on the field. Because the teams in their division are too good to subtract a player of that caliber when their overall defense, it's like the Jenga piece that knocks the whole thing down. He's that vital to everything they do. Spencer makes a good point. The continuity in Detroit has shined through this year because head coach, defensive coordinator, and offensive coordinator have all been together for 3 years. And usually when a team has success, these assistant coaches are getting picked off and going places to be head coaches. We can't ignore, though, Dallas. I have to say something about them here. Mike McCarthy came into this season on thin ice. Robert Saleh just got fired, and I know that the record for the Jets is worse than the Cowboys. I can't believe he's surviving this. I can't believe there's no late Sunday night bulletin from a Schefter or a Rappaport that says that McCarthy has a meeting tomorrow with Jerry Jones. He doesn't have a contract beyond this year. So there was some dead man walking potential to this situation from the very beginning. They have been non-competitive at home. They've been so hideous at home that fans are leaving their games at halftime. The reason why they're not getting completely booed out of their stadium is because a lot of opposing fans make trips to Dallas because it's like a bucket list place to see a football game. So I can't we're going to hear it all day Monday on all the debate shows. Danny and everybody else will be talking about it. I'm just stunned that Dallas can be this inept in their own barn, and there's no report that Mike Zimmer or name the Fossil, the special teams coach who is very widely praised and lauded for the job he's done. I'm shocked that Mike McCarthy is not 1 foot out the door there in Dallas based on what we saw again today. All right, Jaguars and Bears. That game was early in London, and it was a laugher. I thought this game was going to be a very competitive one. I feel like Jacksonville goes over to London, plays the 2 games in a row over there, and gets a bump for it because they're so conditioned to it. They're so used to it. I think it should be an ultimate home field advantage for them, even more so than playing their games down in Florida. And this game got away from them in part because of the way that Caleb Williams and this offense has picked it up. The stats on Williams, and Pat and I have been very hard on him. I just feel like the guy, I think for Pat too, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but too much too soon, expecting results, maybe not putting in the work to get the results. I don't want to belabor that point, but that's just how it kind of felt from the outside. Their offensive line looked like it was a sieve early in the year. The play calling from Shane Waldron, the game they lost in Indianapolis, the goal line play he had there was a joke. And they have flipped a switch. Caleb Williams had 4 touchdowns. The Bears have scored 5 touchdowns or more in consecutive games for the first time since 1956. Danny has said it a million times. This franchise has never had a 4,000-yard passer. They've never had a 30-touchdown guy. Caleb Williams is now looking like the guy who teams allegedly were going to tank for and give up everything they had to go get. The thing that impressed me most about this game today was the way he spread the ball around to all of his eligible receivers and the way he used like every quadrant of the field. Left, right, middle, short, intermediate, long, red zone success, backed up in his own end success. If you didn't know better, you would think Caleb Williams was the guy that had gotten the big contract and was on his second deal, was an NFL vet, and Trevor Lawrence was the rookie who was trying to find his way. So I think it takes maturity. You go overseas across the pond to play this game against the Jacksonville team that's coming off a win with their backs against the wall, sort of. Big props to the Bears winning this game, and Caleb Williams proving me wrong for sure. Steelers and Raiders, my game. I was out in Vegas for this. The Steelers got their running game going really for the first time all year. And the question is, and it will remain, does that keep Justin Fields in at quarterback? I don't expect everyone watching or listening to this to have watched this 4:05 game from Vegas today that ended up in a 19-point Steelers win. It's a very deceptive 19-point win. Turnovers by Fields, bad plays got taken off the board because of questionable Raiders penalties. Aiden O'Connell started and outside of the first drive was pretty bad the entire game. The Raiders defensively, other than Max Crosby, were not very good. So, the Steelers, to their credit, they've lost games like this, gimme games, took advantage of all that. Najee Harris had his best game in a Steelers uniform. He looked like Alabama Najee Harris. He averaged over 7 yards a carry and had a long touchdown run, which he never does, by the way. And Justin Fields honestly was better with his legs than his arm. But I thought a lot of the Chicago Bears version of Justin Fields cropped up today. Inaccurate, badly missing guys, not really reading the defense, going through his reads, sensing that pressure was coming sometimes when it wasn't, escaping pockets prematurely, all that stuff. But you cannot bench a quarterback who just won a game by almost 20 points. I'm sorry. When you're 4-2 and the younger quarterback just won you a game without technically having any turnovers, you can't take him out. And it was funny because Russell Wilson was like stalking Mike Tomlin on the sidelines. You would see a shot after there was a Najee. It might have been his touchdown run, but Wilson is like almost glued next to Tomlin with his helmet on the entire time. It would have to be unbelievably awkward to have the guy that wants to be the starter and believes he should be the starter right next to the coach the entire time. But I don't think that Fields played a good game by any means. But how do you convince the rest of your roster, hey, we're winning with this guy? He does bring an added dimension with his running skill set. We're going to bench him for someone that's had a calf injury for months, who's in his mid-30s, who got benched last year because winning a game 32-13 is not good enough. The optics of that would be ridiculous, and that's why I think Fields is going to remain the starter for next week's game against the Jets. Cardinals and Packers. Green Bay spanked Arizona after the Cardinals beat San Francisco on the road last week. So that makes this an even more impressive win, even though Arizona did not have a winning record coming into this game. Do the Packers have the best offense in the NFC North? Because Spence has the stats on this. The point differentials here in this division are nuts. Minnesota's plus 61, which is the best in the NFL. The Lions are plus 60. The Bears are plus 47, and the Packers have outscored their opponents by 41 points, and yet they are last here. So I remember back in my early days of watching the NFL when there were 3 NFC divisions and not 4, and you had the old NFC Central with the Vikings and the Packers and the Lions and the Bears, and you had Tampa Bay that was in the division with them. And there would be some years where in a 16 playoff, 4 teams would get in from the NFC Central. That actually happened one year. Minnesota, Green Bay, Chicago, and Detroit. And I wish all 4 of these teams could get into the playoffs because they're all fantastic. I'm buying myself time because this is a very difficult question. And the irony of it is that I made the question for myself, and I'm still prattling on here trying to think about the best way and the most eloquent way to answer it. Instead, I am getting off on side tangents. The best offense in the NFC North belongs to Detroit right now. The second best offense in the NFC North is Green Bay. The third is Minnesota. The fourth is Chicago. The reason why it took me so much time to answer that question is because in the case of Minnesota and Chicago, there is potential for them to get even better because think about Minnesota. TJ Hawkinson hasn't even played a game yet. He's on reserve, but he's coming back. He's going to play. So you're going to drop a top, as long as he's somewhat healthy, you're going to drop like a top 5 tight end into that offense that already has Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, solid offensive line, excellent play caller. Minnesota, the reason why I don't put them ahead of the other 2 teams is because Aaron Jones is banged up now. And for as much as I liked Sam Darnold, I'm not going to go overboard here and say I'm going to put him ahead of Jared Goff or Jordan Love. And then with Chicago, you just have the unpredictability of having a rookie quarterback. But this division is insanely good. And I thought, I was inhabiting a world where the AFC North was the cat's ass, where every team in the division last year had a winning record. And I think that this NFC North has a chance to blow everybody out of the water. I said before the season on this podcast that Minnesota was not going to finish in last place. And they've had the best season to date where they've trailed, I think, combined in their 5 games for less than 5 minutes. It might even be 2 or 3 minutes. And they're undefeated. And yet I'm still nervous that prediction is not going to be right because any of the 3 teams behind them could pass them between now and the end of the year. All right. Texans, why do I keep saying all right? I need to cut that out. Texans and Patriots. What did we think of the Drake Maye debut? Because Houston went in there and took care of business. That's what good teams do on the road against a young quarterback, neophyte quarterback. Will Anderson had 3 sacks. C.J. Stroud did his thing even without Nico Collins. So job well done by Houston. That's how you go from good team to great team when you win on the road by 20 points, even against dregs of the NFL franchise like New England. But I thought Maye was fantastic. I'm going to give Drake Maye a B+ in this game because he didn't have Ramondre Stevenson. So he's going into this without his most effective offensive player, a guy that can make his life easier, can catch the ball out of the backfield too. The offensive line we know is in tatters, and that's the whole reason why I think Jacoby Brissett began the season, because they didn't want Drake Maye getting shell-shocked and getting abused behind this offensive line. The wide receivers, unless you are in very deep dynasty fantasy leagues, or you bet, or you live in New England and root for the Patriots, you've got zero clue who these guys are. And the kid went out there and I think accounted for 3 touchdowns. He also led the team in rushing. He had 243 yards. And he did it against a head coach who's a defensive coach with big-time defensive personnel, Stingley, Anderson, Hunter. So that's a heck of a first game. And if I were on the radio at one of our stations, one of our Odyssey stations, WEEI, longtime heritage sports talker in Boston, I'd say I don't give a rat's ass that we lost this game. This is one of the best Mondays we've had since Tom Brady retired, because Drake Maye looked like an NFL quarterback today. So shout out to him. I told you I liked him more than any other quarterback in this draft. Maybe I'll end up being right, although Jaden Daniels is playing like an all-pro right now, and Caleb Williams is no slouch. Browns, Eagles. Philly wins, but we have an incident at the end of the game. And I cannot wait to find out what WIP in Philly and what these lunatic hosts and moronic fans make of this situation. So if you missed it, Philly wins an ugly game. Philly has to hang on for dear life. Philly got a big boost with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith coming back off the bye, and both of them caught touchdown passes in this game. Jalen Hurts still does not look like the guy who took the Eagles to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. And because of that, Nick Sirianni is persona non grata in Philly. And so with, I think, either just a couple minutes left or seconds left when the game was practically over, Sirianni is going back and forth with fans, Eagles fans, not Browns fans who are heckling him, Eagles fans on the sideline. And it just speaks to the adversarial relationship and hate relationship now that is developed there with him. Spencer's right. I saw the video, but I didn't hear the audio. Sirianni had his kids at the post-game press conference with him, which is a stroke of brilliance on his part, but I think it's BS, because how do you get into a real spirited back and forth at a press conference when little kids are up there? I actually think that that's inappropriate, because it makes it hard for the people in that room to ask critical questions and for everybody to do their job. So I'm actually not a fan of that. I think it's a cop-out move by Sirianni, but that's probably the way he wanted it after the game. He's not a popular guy there, and I don't think beating Cleveland by 4 points really does much for him. The question that we have is, did today help or hurt his cause as thinking of his employment and long-term chances of succeeding in Philadelphia? And my answer is no. I think at best he got a stay of execution. I don't know how close he actually is to getting fired. I haven't talked to anybody in Philadelphia in a few weeks, but I said this about Nick Sirianni on this podcast, and they brought me on in Philadelphia to talk about this. This is such a front-running coach. And he's so emotional. You could see it when they were winning and having a great season. He loved to be demonstrative on the sidelines. He'd give crap to opposing sidelines. He'd make faces to the camera. He'd preen and do all this stuff. Well, when that's your personality, you better friggin' win. It reminds me a little bit of Rex Ryan. When Rex Ryan was winning the last time the Jets were any good, and he had this bravado and larger-than-life personality, great. It fit New York. But the second it started to go the other way, people got sick of that act because these Philadelphia and New York are ultimate talk the talk. You got to walk the walk towns. I actually love that about both places. And so I don't think Nick Sirianni I don't think Monday is going to be an easy day for him on sports talk radio airwaves because you should have beaten Philadelphia by a lot more points today. And I don't blame the fans for giving you a hard time on the sideline. You got to handle it better than giving it right back to them, though, buddy. Chargers and Broncos. Speaking of coaches, you had Jim Harbaugh survive a health scare, a heart arrhythmia situation where he had to go into a blue tent, had to actually leave the sideline and come back, which is never good to hear. I think he's had his heart treated before. I don't think he had open heart surgery or anything crazy like that, but I do believe there was an incident when he was at Michigan. I don't know if it happened in game, but I've just seen online that there's a history of some heart ticks with him in the past. What kind of difference has Harbaugh made here with the Chargers? He has taken them from team that was perennial underachiever under Brandon Stokely. Stokely was best known for ridiculous in-game decisions that drove old school football fans nuts. Did I not say Staley there? Did I say Stokely like the old wide receiver? My bad if I did. Yeah, I was thinking of the guy that played for the Ravens and Broncos. Good catch there. I think he's actually a sports talk radio host in Denver, which is funny. Thinking of Staley and just the kookiness of him, and I think that rubbed his players the wrong way. They stopped believing in him, stopped trusting him. I actually know that for a fact because I was at a Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and not one but two of their players in separate pre-interview conversations said that to me. And Harbaugh is a weirdo, but we know that he maximizes his offensive players to their fullest everywhere he goes. And it's funny because as a quarterback, he leans on the run game and believes in running the ball to set up the pass. Andy Reid, who is an offensive lineman, is the exact opposite. He wants to throw the ball a million times and then just sprinkle in the run. Harbaugh has been run first his entire life, and they've gotten to it despite offensive line injuries. They've taken these Ravens discarded guys off the scrap heap. J.K. Dobbins had another big game today. They scored on their first 4 possessions. Now 2 were field goals, but guess what? That is still significant because of how impressive Denver's defense has been the last few weeks. And Pat and I have made a big deal about that here on the podcast. So coming off a bye, you never know how a team is going to respond, especially Harbaugh having such a long break from the NFL. If his methodologies and coaching techniques are going to get through to the players, and Herbert's getting the ball out faster than he ever has. So I think he's made a world of difference. I would pick them to make the playoffs right now. And that was a big game from that perspective to go to Denver today and slow down the Broncos and I think reestablish themselves as the second best team in the AFC West behind Kansas City. And I think finishing in second place in that division will probably get you in the playoffs this year. Bucs Saints. This was a wild game. Baker Mayfield put up 4 touchdowns. The Bucs as a whole put up 51. Is Tampa Bay a dark horse in the NFC? Yes, they are. And first of all, great to see Tampa win, given everything that's gone on down there. I know, like, I've gone through my own life tragedies in the last few years. And when you do it, the sports results and living and dying with those things, you realize that even though I take this job very seriously, that some of these things in the global world, or like the global world of priorities or list of priorities, not all that important. And I'm sure a lot of people down there have much bigger things to tend to and worry about right now. But sports can galvanize. We saw the way the Saints were able to bring fans back after Katrina. And thankfully, it doesn't look like this natural disaster did quite as much devastation, but they were showing some of the pictures and video during all the NFL games today. And it's just sickening how people's lives can get turned upside down by these weather events. But anyways, sorry to pontificate about that so much. The Bucs can score. And the thing about their offense that you've got to love is they can make mistakes like Baker did today with 3 interceptions. And they're so explosive, they can make up for it. They've found something with these backup running backs. Bucky Irving, who I believe was an Oregon running back, and Sean Tucker, who I watched at Syracuse, who was an undrafted guy who I loved, reminded me of Austin Eckler, actually. And both of those guys stepped up and played great today. Chris Godwin had a gigantic game. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. And see, the difference, I think, between Baker in years past is that when they almost blew the game in the second quarter after being up 17-0 and letting New Orleans score 20 unanswered, I think the old Baker would have unraveled. But the veteran Baker Mayfield doesn't do that anymore. And so there's 2 legit teams in the NFC South. We'll get to the other one in a second here. But because their offense has been able to keep it up following the offensive coordinator there, Canales taking the Panthers head coaching job, they haven't skipped a beat there. We know that Bulls can get the defense to respond when everyone is healthy. Winfield had a huge interception in this game. Yeah, Tampa Bay is like the definition, I think, of dark horse, even though they're in the playoffs every year. Four in a row, actually. They've been there, and I give Bulls credit for carrying on and grabbing the torch from Bruce Arians and keeping the Bucs relevant. Colts Titans. Joe Flacco, two more touchdowns. They go on the road and beat a bad Tennessee team. Should Flacco remain the starter when Anthony Richardson is healthy? Yes, he should. And Kirk Herbstreit said this on a preseason game in August, and I'm fairly certain that Danny and I made fun of him for it and said, what a reactionary thing for Herbie to say during a friggin' preseason game. Well, guess what? He was right. I look at Anthony Richardson this way. He was so raw coming out of college that I think it's fine to move in a direction that is reminiscent of the way the Packers handled Jordan Love with Aaron Rodgers there. And I get it. Gardner Minshew last year and Joe Flacco this year are not Aaron Rodgers winning back-to-back MVP awards. But Flacco, in my opinion, clearly has something left. Even last week in the Jacksonville game, he wasn't the reason why they're lost. Their defense just got picked apart in that matchup. He's had a ridiculous redemptive arc where he won the Comeback Player of the Year award last year with the Browns, getting into the playoffs. My God, do they miss him? I'm sure Cleveland Sports Talk Radio is getting calls about Baker Mayfield and Joe Flacco constantly, which is just delightful. Why rush it with Richardson? He's been hurt so much. I don't think it's bad for the guy to continue to watch and learn when he came into the league so early with so few starts at Florida. So, yeah, you're not winning a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco, but I think they can win a playoff game with Flacco. I think he's that good, and it's not quite Kurt Warner in Arizona. I'm not going to go that far, but the veteran quarterback who on his 3rd or 4th chance makes the most of it, I would not look a gift horse in the mouth and bench him. All right, last one. Falcons and Panthers, although double check Spence to make sure I'm not forgetting any games because I feel like when I do this by myself, I screw that up sometimes. Falcons and Panthers. This is now 3 straight wins for Atlanta in the NFC South. How are they doing it? They're doing it now by finally taking advantage of the weapons that they have offensively. And it's twofold. It's Kirk Cousins, obviously coming over from Minnesota. And now that he's healthier and he's gotten off the rust of the Achilles and not doing a lot in training camp in the preseason, He's coming alive. I think Zach Robinson, who they brought in as the offensive coordinator from the Rams, is a guy that when Baker Mayfield got sent to LA late that season, he was able to untap him and get him to play good football. And Raheem Morris, head coach there, has coached offense and defense in the NFL, so he's extremely versatile. So last year there, Arthur Smith and the quarterbacks were brutal. I get it, but they didn't get the ball to Bijan Robinson enough. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, same thing. And Kirk Cousins is able to do that. Now, it's the Panthers, are the worst defense in the NFL, but it was a road game today, and the game did get close in the middle. So there was a chance for Atlanta to screw it up and, lose a game that it should win. I thought that they were going to F it up after two white knucklers against the Saints and Buccaneers. This is why Arthur Blank made this move to bring Kirk Cousins in. And Atlanta was the preseason pick to win the NFC South. It's going to come down to them versus Tampa. And I think that huge comeback that we saw from them last Thursday might end up being the difference between who finishes in first and gets a home playoff game and who's fighting it out for a wild card spot with those great NFC North teams. All right. How'd we do? Went much longer than I thought. Okay. That's incredible because, like I said, I'm on a 3-day hangover, and I thought at some point talking this long would cause me to lose my voice. Pat will be back for Thursday. Thursday, we'll have the Sean Payton Bowl with the Broncos and Saints. So we'll get back to you then. We'll preview all the Week 7 games. Please, it means everything to us if you tell your friends to listen and subscribe to First and Pod. Subscribing is massive. That's what keeps this thing afloat. That's what keeps us in the good graces of our bosses. That's what keeps Spencer employed. That's what allows for us to have a great host like an NFL All-Pro and Patrick Peterson. That's how I continue to get my opinions out there on everything NFL. So please, please do that. That's really the only thing we ask for on this podcast is for you to subscribe and then tell other NFL fans about this podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll have the whole team back on Thursday. This is First and Pod.